Hey everybody, welcome back to the KrakCast News. I'm here with Josh and Dr. Mike. Yeehaw! Let me say this right up front before I forget to say it later. This is our last news for about a month or so. We're taking most of August, maybe all of August off. For most of August, we'll post some of our greatest hits from a couple of years ago, things you may not have caught the first time they were posted. It's vacation season for everybody, us included. So we've got the news today, and later this week we're going to post an episode. Actually, interesting conversation we had earlier today about Asperger's syndrome, of all things. But it is definitely worth a listen, so check it out. But after this week's two episodes, so this news episode and the Asperger's episode, again, no new posts for about a month or so. We hope you enjoy your August vacation as much as we intend on enjoying ours.
Imagine all of us in our little Speedos right now. Yeah.
Are you taking a vacation, by the way? Are you going someplace?
Probably not, no. Maybe in October, November.
Staycation?
Staycation, yeah.
Okay.
Not illegally importing budgerigars.
Josh, what are you doing for August?
I think I might travel to Podgorja once or twice.
Pack your bags.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
sounds good.
That's exactly.
Let's hit the headlines this week. Where do we want to start? Let's start locally. Here. We all know, we've talked about this many times, the hotel formerly known as the Forum, which is still there, an eyesore on the the south side of the river, inactive for about 20 years now. Just over.
Actually, it was active for what? Like
It's a little over 10 years. I think in 89 is when it opened. Everybody thinks it's like from the 60s, 70s. No, it opened in 89.
Yeah, that's right, late 80s.
And it functioned, I believe, till 2001 or 2.
Well, here's the thing. I remember going to the casino there in 2001, but I can't swear that it was still operating as a hotel upstairs. And I don't think it closed for another year or two after that before reopening more recently as a bar. Anyway, let's say it's roughly 20 years that it's been inactive as a hotel. And about a decade or so ago, the city, in a respectable effort to do something with that property, they established some kind of like a recreation zone, let's call it. And over the years, there have been different things. Remember the floating pool?
Nobody ever actually swam in it.
There was a pool on a barge that was kept right in front of it. There was the beach that has come and disappeared about 3 times now. There's the usual bars upstairs. And what's that club that's kind of like the Anchor, the biggest name there, Dr. Mike?
Forum Sistania.
Is that one place or a collection of places?
That's the main area by the old reception registration for the hotel entrance.
And then you have the park outside, the rides, what do you call it in Poland? Luna Park outside. Well, we learned this week that the beach is coming back after about a 3-year absence. The beach is coming back. Now, why they announced this in July, I guess it's to give them time to get it ready for 2027 or something like that, given the city's recent record on opening times in places like Zakshuvek and whatnot. But the beach is supposed to come back for next year. By my count, this is the 3rd time the beach has reappeared. I don't know why they can't make up their mind. I don't know what's so difficult about maintaining the beach. But what do you think about the beach on the river, the man-made artificial beach on the river?
I like the idea of it being a recreational area. I just thought it was weird they called it a beach when you can't actually walk from the beach into the water. For me, unless you can get into the water,
can't even get in the water at all.
It is literally a grown-up's sand pit, isn't it? I mean.
Well, it's volleyball nets. It's not just a place to sunbathe. It's a little playground for kids. It's just basically
an outdoor recreational area. One of the reasons apparently the previous incarnation was shut down was that they had the bar and restaurant, and the construction was apparently too high, too tall, blocking the view for people living, across the road of the river.
Whatever.
It was a 1-story building, and it was half a foot too high. People said it was an eyesore. For me, it was just fine, normal construction. I was glad to see more stuff happening on the riverside.
I think the biggest problem was that kind of bar restaurant was absolutely rubbish from the service to the quality of what they had for sale. To never being open at a time when you might actually want to be there.
Oh, that was true. It was way too much of a mid-2010s poser place, really flashy, colorful, show off and shiny, people, looking too well. It was very clubby by the river, but it was almost never open or anything like that. It wasn't
kind of like the Bulgarian Black Sea coast.
For me, this is another sign that the city government doesn't really know what they want to do. They don't have a long-term plan for the riverfront. We've talked about this before, about how in Prague, in Budapest, even in Warsaw, the riverfront is a focal point of nightlife, of tourism and whatnot. And here, because of design and planning decisions made a long time ago, it's too late for that. We can't have a riverfront like you have in these other cities. And it's nice and it's worth a stroll, but it's not a magnet that brings people to the river. And I think this whole thing behind the forum, including the beach, no beach, it's just kind of like, okay, what are we going to do this year? There's no long-term plan for what it's supposed to look like
to beach
in 20
or not
years.
To beach.
Exactly. And so I think that the riverfront here, it's always going to be a problem, I think, in terms of what to do with it. Mike?
I agree with you. And unfortunately, that whole area between from Forum and across the other side of the river by Jubilat and Wawel, that could be a nice outdoor area. And it's generally just ignored. It's more, you don't even know there's a river there until you're right at the river.
Am I the only one who thinks those boats are those floating cafes are dumps, basically? There's nothing, I think one of them might be okay, but most of them are kind of
Augusta's nice.
third rate.
I like the idea, but there should be plenty of them. I would think it would be a fantastic idea if there was, like, say, 20, 30 of these barges, each with a different theme idea. It was like a whole nightlife scene down the river of, clubs, bars, restaurants for everybody. I think that would be a fantastic idea, but they just never really went with it.
Kind of a sidebar to this, it just occurred to me that I don't monitor traffic in the river very much these days, but I can remember years ago you would see barges going up, and mostly from south to north, moving things. Is the river active in an industrial, commercial way?
I don't think so. I don't. No.
Very limited expanse. There has been talk by the current government about building a canal which would connect the Wisła here through Śląsk all the way to Oder and stuff like that. And it would basically be about this, what's it called, transporting coal and other raw materials.
But what about that?
That's,
what do you call it? The lock that we have on, what's that road that goes over from... Actually,
like near Wiślane Tarasy and all that.
Yeah,
like
exactly. So it's not navigable past that point at all. Were those locks always there? Because I'm sure I remember big barges going up and down just here. So where were they going? I don't know. Well, but the point is, if there's no commercial traffic, it means it should be safe and accessible for other things, other kinds of development.
And apparently the water quality for years has been very good. Just nobody wants to swim in the river here. Just, it's more of like a mental block. I think if you're fine with swimming in Zaksówek or Kryspinów, then the Wisła River should be perfectly acceptable as well.
Let's move on to something else, still local news here in Krakow. We covered this about 2 months ago. The city unveiled a project, blatant copying of something that has been very successful in Wrocław, the city of Wrocław, where they have these gnomes. Is that the right word? Dwarves.
I think it's like we get into fantasy talk.
Elves, whatever they are, all over the city. They're really cute. And, if you're a local, or actually if you're a tourist or a local, it's kind of fun finding all of them and whatnot. Every city map has them marked all over and whatnot. And anyway, Krakow has their own project. Of course, here in Krakow, we have a dragon. So they're going to be, I forgot the number. It's quite a substantial. Is it more than 100?
I think 90 was the...
Okay, so not quite 100 dragons all over the city. They're roughly, 20, 25, 30 centimeters tall. And this week we got our first look at a handful of them. And apparently they're going to be installed in a couple of months in various places around the city. I like it. I think it's a cool idea. It's charming. Again, as long as we give full credit to Wrocław for being the pioneers here. I'm kind of curious to see where they're going to go.
The whole idea of
and how secure they're going to be.
Like little Easter eggs, so not going to be super obvious. You just be walking down the planter down the street, and then like right next to a building in the corner, it's like, oh, there's one of those dragons. Oh, there's another one of those dragons.
Right. The examples that we saw include like the dragon smoking a pipe and a dragon reading a newspaper. They're supposed
dragon
to be
holding like an old analog camera.
Okay. I'm curious also to see. Obviously, the Rynek will be the epicenter, but how far away from the Rynek will the furthest one be placed?
They're supposed to be, in Podgórze, Park Jordana. I think even in the Rudzaj they were talking about them.
That far, huh?
Yeah. We're talking about dozens here, so this will be all over the place. The highest concentration, of course, would be the Old Town area, but they're supposed to be scattered around all over town.
No, but it is cool in Wrocław. You walk down what you think is not a very well-traveled back street, and like you say, you look in a doorway, and there's a
A huge crowd of Japanese people with cameras.
Dwarf or a gnome or an elf or a little person or whatever the hell you call them. But I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be cool. What was it, Josh? Autumn, they said? September, October, I guess, something like that. So look for the first one in a couple of months. Where should we go now? Oh, more local news, but this is news of the dark and depressing and horrible kind of news. This is 2 nights ago. So we're recording this on Sunday, so I guess it would have been Friday night, or was it Thursday night, that a body was found at the crossing of Jana and Tomasha, right in front of the, what's that famous cafe right there called? The Dim, of course. This was about 3 a.m. It turns out it was a Belarusian national who'd been living here in Krakow for some time. Dead body in the middle of the street, and thanks to the monitoring, police apparently were later able to catch up with the suspect. Let's say the suspect, allegedly. A couple of questions here. Well, the first one's not a question. First thing is just a confirmation. Nothing good happens after 2 a.m. Your mom was right, by the way, when she told you that. Nothing good. No reason to be out after 2 a.m. But I'm curious about the monitoring. I guess it's kind of easy at that time of the day, guys, because it's not. You don't have to pick people out of a crowd. It's easy to follow somebody. But if it's that simple, if we can solve crimes by looking at the monitoring, why don't we solve basically every crime in the center of town?
I would just have to hook up a camera everywhere and monitor everybody's telephone conversations, text messages, all their interactions, and we can solve every crime at that moment.
Oh, no, like just pass more laws. I mean, obviously, since they
make it against the law to kill people.
Yeah, since murder's been illegal, I mean, nobody gets murdered.
No, but seriously, I am curious about how they do this. I mean, if the guy was, if the suspect was dumb enough to walk in front of lots of cameras, it makes the cops' jobs easier. But Dr. Mike, like you said, there is telephone information. Everybody's carrying a tracker, what amounts to a tracker in their pocket. I wonder if they can quickly access that information as well. Any guesses on how this works?
Probably they can. Polish law is a little different than the U.S. Due process is quite simple to get the proper warrant to then, find out where that cell phone was pinged in what given location. But from what I understand, the camera actually, had the event recorded.
Wow.
And it turned out there was other people involved as well. That there was one person who punched him, a younger man in his 40s, then a second person, this older gentleman, 59 years old, which is the one who actually gave the death blow. And a third person is also being charged.
Now, beating somebody to death. This is, unless it involves falling down and hitting your head.
We don't have the details, so it might have just been 1 or 2 hits. And a lot of people don't understand that.
How do you kill somebody with 1 or 2 hits?
Just like I was saying, like you were about to say, falling over. It's hitting somebody. It's not like in the movies. It's not like They Live where you can fight for 20 minutes and walk away fine. 1 or 2 punches, you break a bone, you hit somebody in the thigh, in the throat, cause circulation to stop. He falls over, hits his head. It's not that difficult to kill somebody or cause long-term damage.
Well, that's my guess on the cause of the proximate, immediate, or whatever. The cause of death is that you fall down and you hit your head, and terrible things happen. But if that is not involved, I just wonder what kind of brutality is required to kill somebody with your fists. No comment.
I don't know, and I don't want to know.
Yeah,
I assume horrible. It's doable. I know it's doable. It's not something I really think. Too much wasn't.
One of you reminded me a few weeks ago that there's no longer a police station in the Rennek as there was for.
That's right, yeah.
So where do the police have a presence in the old town these days?
Usually they're just in vehicles located around town.
But there's no office?
There's no office. I think the closest one, probably the one on Pędzichów, near Szlak.
Maybe Szeroka?
The Szeroka, that's another close one, yeah. But they don't have an office, but they still have personnel.
Yeah, of course they're always in cars and
of course, is it on Mogilska, is it, or on
Lubitsch, the Biały Dom. Yeah, of course, that's
the big one, isn't it?
That's the closest one. But it's just odd that given the people traffic in the Stare Miasto, that there's no formal police, an address basically. Very strange. Where should we go now? Let's go national. Here's a topic that has been popping up all over the place, really. This is one of those things that's showed up on our radar a couple of years ago in every country, really. The idea of universal basic income, the idea that you get money for being alive, basically, from what I can tell. Many local governments have discussed this. If you have implemented it, national governments not so much. But we learned this week, guys, that the voivodstvo of Varmia, that's Mazury, basically. That's kind of like the northeast part of the country, more or less. The regional government there has decided to start a universal basic income in the amount of 1,300 zlotys for everybody, all residents. I mean, this is kids as well.
Yeah.
I think it's over 18s. It's a pilot program to see what.
No, it's literally everybody, because it also, the idea is that all other existing benefits, whether they're unemployment benefits or disability benefits or 500 plus or any of those things, they all go. It's just simply that everyone gets 1,300 Zs a month. It doesn't matter, it's not determined whether you're a member of a household of 6 people or you live on your own. It's just simply per individual, and not just citizens, but actually residents. So actually, were it to be applied in Malopolska, I would be entitled.
So a family of 4 gets 5,200 a month.
Right.
Okay, that's not rich by any measure, but it's not nothing either. It's rather substantial. It's enough to live on in certain circumstances. 5,200 a month.
Well, I think the idea of 1,300 per individual is that. Of course, it's nowhere near luxury, but that is sufficient to live on. And I think this is. Actually, there's a much broader debate about the whole idea of a universal basic income, which has been much discussed by various clever people, and often the sticking point between various, shall we say, kind of like political ideologies is exactly at what level it should be pitched. And I think the idea is that it is not. It shouldn't be sufficient so that you don't do anything else and you live comfortably on that free money. The idea is that everybody gets that as a kind of as a basic foundation, and then you are free to choose whether you would like to supplement that by, for example, getting a full-time job, getting a part-time job, even doing some kind of job that's like not even part-time, just a handful of hours a month, just to kind of top it up.
But do we know that as far as I know, that universal basic income is something that's largely associated with the political left? Is there something about the leadership of this voivodstvo that has resulted in them being
John,
the first?
I have to disagree. I think that what's associated with the political left is a universal basic income that is sufficiently high that it is analogous to what is commonly termed a living wage, which is something that's already slightly different from when we have a minimum wage. Right. But the actual theory and idea of a universal basic income is not that. It is just simply that you absolutely streamline the entire welfare state down to just simply every single person gets this amount of money.
Because as you mentioned earlier, this isn't on top of everything else. This is instead of everything else.
Yeah.
Imagine the state is spending billions on welfare programs for kids, for disabled people, for the elderly, for the unemployed. Looks at all that money it's spending and says, okay, instead of having these dozens of programs being administrated with so many bureaucrats, let's take all that money, just divide that among the citizens we have.
Spend the same amount.
Same amount with less, or maybe even slightly less, but without all the bureaucracy and administration. So the same amount of money.
Well, that's the key, isn't it? You say without this bureaucracy and administration. I'm guessing that not a single job will be lost.
Well, I think this is a thing, but I mean, the reason why this is popular, on people, if we say on the political right, the free marketeers and everything, is that it is designed to shrink the state. That we have a far smaller public sector, that indeed the vast expense of administering the various welfare systems that all countries to some extent have around the world. The big expense, of course, is not just the money that is dispensed to the recipients, but the huge numbers of employees and paper pushers,
getting it out,
bureaucracy.
You don't actually go to an office, lodge a form, wait for approval and a decision to get the money. No, it's like you just get that money. That's it.
But see, I'm curious about how this kind of aligns or conflicts with federal, nationwide laws. For example, you mentioned disability. If I'm disabled and I live in that voivodstvo, I give up my right for renta from the government because I'm getting the 1,300. So just because I live there, I don't get what I would call a federal
and this is when it starts to get interesting, because again there are different perspectives on this, and there are the kind of UBI purists who will say no, literally that will replace every single benefit, including like elderly people who don't have a private pension plan or whatever. It is literally like the same for everybody, regardless of your personal circumstances. And then there are those who say, well, yes, but what about, for example, the severely disabled, those people who need round-the-clock care, those people who are, if left to themselves, are essentially immobile, aren't able to buy food, take care of themselves. So there are exceptions. And then, of course, you open the door to one set of exceptions, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. So, I mean, like a lot of kind of like ideology-driven plans. In principle, it's really sound. When you start getting into the nitty-gritty of actually implementing it, of course.
Well, it sounds like in some ways it's an experiment. Maybe other regions in the country will look at it, and after a reasonable amount of time, probably a couple of years or maybe more, they'll say, okay, what changes have been made? Have you saved any money when it comes to the size of your bureaucracy, for example? And if the answer is yes, maybe other regions will kind of follow. But surely it sounds like the kind of thing that's already been tried somewhere.
There, I believe,
in Europe,
Scandinavian countries.
I think one of the Baltic countries has also floated, and actually at a much higher level. But I think this is, I'm bound to get it wrong. I think it might be Latvia, which also kind of has this relatively low flat tax regardless of income. But it's tricky. And of course, I mean, you introduce a system like that, you're not going to be able to immediately axe all of those bureaucratic jobs, because those people. One of the great advantages of working in the public sector, aside from the various generous allowances in terms of holidays and sick leave and pensions and
takes an act of God to fire you.
Is that like you really have to kind of murder the Pope to get sacked?
Right. Well, we'll see how it goes. I'm skeptical. This brings up, I think it's in the Polish character to resent the fairness aspect of this. Just because you live there, you get 1,300 on top of everything else. And 1,300, it's not a fortune, but it's something. And as I said, start multiplying that by the size of a family. And over the course of a year, that's 60,000 zlotys extra.
A lot of households don't have that much here.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, right? But I mean, like a family with 2 children will be getting 1,000 a month for a start, from 500 plus. And I think that, like, for people on low incomes, there's some kind of like family tax credit, and I mean, this is the thing.
It's not need based either. The rich people get this too.
Right? Yeah. But I think that the ideal implementation is that it's something that is available to all, but you do actually have to at least tick a box to receive it. And I suppose there's this feeling that handful of people who are earning 50,000 a month, they're kind of like just not going to be bothered.
Currently, Dr. Mike, do you know, for people who get what they call renta, which is like a disability payment, is that paid from Warsaw or from your regional government?
The actual renta, let me think.
Maybe it's by Warsaw and administered by the regional government.
If it goes through ZUS, so then it's national level. But there are rentas that are handed out by like the Małopolska regional kind of support. So I think there are multiple layers there, but it's mainly like national, state, like centralized.
More news from Warsaw this week. This time we learned that the Senate unanimously, with a few abstentions, but I think it was 96-0, unanimously approved the entry of Sweden and Finland into NATO. All the NATO members have to vote on this. The vote is just a formality. Everybody's going to vote in favor of it. You think that there might have been a couple of voices against it, but unanimous. No word on the timeline of when this is going to result in actual membership for these countries. I think my take is going to be different than yours on this one, Josh. Dr. Mike, how do we feel about Poland waving the green flag for Sweden and Finland to join NATO?
Well, I think it's an excellent, particularly Sweden has a slightly murky history when it comes to its purported neutrality, and I'm not one of these people who think that this kind of expansion of NATO is some ghastly global conspiracy to try and topple the honest, hardworking Russian government or anything like that. I think it may be misguided in some ways, but I think it's an attempt to sort of like democratic nations all joined together in kind of standing together to fight tyranny and oppression and bad things generally.
Well, it's a defensive pact. They shouldn't be fighting anything. They should be, if anything, defending against that if they are attacked. What I think is a little amusing, because especially when I'm watching like U.S. news, I'm generally conservative or libertarian leaning, and they present these countries as like weak little countries that haven't paid into the system to begin with. Sweden and Finland, compared to a lot of Europe, have invested quite a fair amount of resources into their national defense. Like Sweden has built up a lot in when it comes to like say aircraft or military equipment. Finland, for a small country, they've been more or less kind of neutral or playing both. I don't want to say playing both sides, but they've been in this weird position between the West and Russia and the Soviets before then, where they had to play it safe. And they were always prepared for the fact that, like, yeah, we're in a bad place. We need to be ready for anything. So from a military standpoint, they're on better footing than a lot of other countries.
Well, they acquitted themselves pretty comfortably against the Soviets in the Winter War, didn't they?
Exactly. Well, they did end up more or less losing, but they made sure that the Soviets paid for it.
Yeah.
And Sweden is another one of those countries that always seems like beatnik, peaceful and stuff like that. But yeah, they've always made sure they have a comfortable, when you compare to like other countries in Europe, they've had a military there presence. Yeah. They've trained, they have equipment, they have the capabilities that are on par with other more richer nations, actually. Nothing like the United States. When the United States basically blows everybody out of the water there, figuratively and literally, when it comes to military spending and abilities and capabilities. But I think NATO is better off right now with both of those nations.
Interesting. I was intrigued to discover just a couple of days ago that the United Kingdom's defence budget is the world's fourth largest and is actually bigger than the Russian defence budget. Now, admittedly, of course, the costings and the number of personnel are massively different. But
I think it's hilarious when you talk about the budgets. The budget that the U.S. spends on just maintaining its nuclear arsenal is higher than the budget of the entire Russian military, which has a larger nuclear arsenal.
Which should be terrifying because there's a lot of maintenance involved that they're not paying for. So what the hell is going on?
Most of their rockets will not launch. If they hit anything, they won't explode.
They're all rusted out and everything.
A nuclear bomb is a little more, it's millimeters. If something's not adjusted the right way, it's going to spread a lot of plutonium everywhere, but it's not going to be a big nuclear boom.
I think I'm very glad you make that point, because this is a classic example of the type of sloppy journalism we see all the time, and that a nuclear equipped missile can kind of land and explode, but if it's not actually the fissile material that explodes, if it's just the detonator, then, as you say, all that will happen is that some of the radioactive material from the warhead will be spread around the near vicinity, but this is not the same as an actual, proper...
It will be a dirty bomb, but not a thermonuclear hydrogen bomb. Yeah.
So it's my turn to disagree with everything you said, except one thing, Dr. Mike, I will agree, and it's fair to point this out. You're right to point this out, that, Sweden and Finland as Scandinavian countries are easy to kind of mock and lampoon as kind of, all peace and love. But both of those countries, especially the Finns, they have a hard edge to them. I would not screw with the Finns. These are tough people. When they're defending their own territory, these are people you do not want to mess with. And the Swedes, again, easy targets, but these are smart, capable people, and they have a documented history of actually innovation in the arms and weaponry industry. And so these are good. These are people you want on your team if the idea is you're going to war. However, there are two big problems here. Yes, two big problems. One, the first problem NATO has is the same problem that the EU has. What does it mean to be in the club if everybody's in the club? That is the existential question that no one is able to answer. And let's remember that NATO's enemy, the Warsaw Pact, dissolved itself 32 years ago. There is no formal enemy. Now, we all know that de facto it's Russia. Okay, so let's be honest about that. Why can't NATO come out and say we are an anti-Russian alliance? What's so hard about that? Well, because they don't want to provoke Russia. Well, provoking Russia, okay, let's add Finland, a country on their borders, to NATO. I mean, make up your mind. There's a schizophrenia at work here, and it's just weird.
Well,
we don't want to provoke, but all we're doing is constantly provoking. And Putin is on record. Again, no one's going to publicly defend what Putin is doing, what Russia is doing, but he says repeatedly that we do not want NATO on our doorsteps. And that's what adding Finland and Sweden is doing. And while we may get some childish satisfaction out of trolling Russia and saying, what are you going to do about it? Okay, well, what if they did significantly increase the intensity of their attack on Ukraine, which they're completely capable of, by the way, because up until this point, they've been fighting with one hand behind their back. And if they decide to really unleash what they have, things could get a lot uglier than it's been up till now. God forbid. So that's the first thing. Again, it's fun to troll Putin, fun to mock him, lampoon him, and all the rest of it. But this can have serious consequences. Josh?
Yeah, because, I mean, I certainly get what you're saying, and you're not the only person that I hear taking this line. But I think that the interesting thing is that I don't have any more patience with this. Like, we should not be, provoking Putin, poking the bear, so to speak, because, frankly, I mean, he may have his own territorial ambitions, whether it's in Georgia or in Moldova or in Ukraine, or possibly some of the, former Soviet republics in Central Asia. But he has no qualms about taking that step further beyond what we would consider acceptable. I mean, it's okay for him to be, launching missiles at hospitals and schools in Ukraine, or conducting a dirty war on the ground, and we are still kind of havering about the fact that we're like, we don't want to provoke Mr. Putin. He doesn't give a flying. I mean, he's happy to do whatever he wants. I mean, for him, it's a no-lose situation. I mean, he's just going to carry on and carry on. I do not see. So what if kind of Finland being on Russia's border, being a member of NATO, is further provocation? I mean, he has invaded sovereign nations, whether it's Georgia or part of Moldova or Ukraine, nations whose existence is recognized under international. You can all laugh about what exactly constitutes international law, but I mean the situation is a lot less ambiguous than, for example, Taiwan, which we kind of skirt around and we don't want to upset the Chinese, so we don't really recognize Taiwan. We do, of course, do an enormous amount of international trade with them because that's where we get our semiconductors from and so on. I just think, no. I mean, if Putin wants to behave like the school bully, then he's got to put up with the fact that maybe one day, a load of the parents are going to get together and kind of turn up and say, sort of do that if you want to, but face the consequences.
The talk here, conversation is also about spheres of influence. Russia, Putin, post-Soviet unions, they believe they should have a sphere of influence over the countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union. And they don't like the idea that these countries do not want to be under his sphere of influence.
Well, also that, yeah.
And that these countries willingly prefer to be under the sphere of influence of the West, of the United States, that they choose to be. He would rather that their security policies are chosen by him through force than these countries willingly choosing to be on the other side or under the influence of another country. Because unfortunately, we don't live in a world where Poland or these other nations can be, quote unquote, under their own sphere of influence, completely independent. It's just not like that. It's more or less you have to choose one side. And you can either choose to be with NATO and the United States willingly, or you can sit around and wait until you're invaded by Putin or under his influence by force, like Belarus or other countries like that.
Let me pick up at that point, Dr. Mike. Let me resume my rant on that point, because that's where I wanted to pick up on. And that's what we need to acknowledge this, is that, okay, if the Europeans want to make a big show out of solidarity, defensive solidarity against Russia, make it a European thing. Drop the North Atlantic part and just have the treaty organization. Drop the U.S. and Canada, maybe Iceland if you want. Make it a European thing. I have yet to hear a convincing argument for why any of this is America's problem. Yes, Dr. Mike, I know there are certain elements in the American government that want it to be our problem so they can move in and exert influence over this and this. But I personally, as an American myself, I find it, I find it a bit distressing and odd, and I kind of resent it that the Polish government, by approving Sweden's and Finland's entry into NATO, is putting American lives on the line, because we all know that ultimately, end of the day, whatever cliche you want to use, NATO is an American operation with European allied support. And that's not to diminish their contributions in terms of money and sacrifice of soldiers occasionally. I'm not belittling that at all, but it is an American operation. And I find it bizarre that the politicians in Warsaw are obligating American soldiers to go fight if, for example, God forbid, Finland and Russia get into some spat on their border. We're supposed to go nose to nose with a nuclear-armed Russia because of domestic internal European squabbles. I don't find that compelling to put our resources on the line. This is your problem. I've said this before, Josh, many times. Why can't the Europeans, with more money, greater GDP, and nuclear powers, why can't you handle Russia yourself? I keep saying the same thing.
I know you do, and I think that there's a couple of at least half reasonable counter arguments to that. One is that we have fairly clear evidence, in Brussels and Strasbourg, that when you put European nations together and try and organise a system of government, it is a vastly expensive, bloated, bureaucratic mess, and there's no reason to believe that some collective military European organisation would be any better. I think the other thing, and actually, in a way, this exactly agrees with what you're saying, but kind of flips it, and is the very fact that the United States is the world's military leader, but is also detached and separate from this particular sphere of influence, gives it greater gravitas, greater leverage, if you like. I think that the individual nations in Europe, whether within the European Union or outside the European Union, gutted as it has been over recent years, the British armed forces are very widely respected by other militaries around the world. Poland has been earning a good reputation for itself in recent years. I don't think there's any issue necessarily with particular nations' armed forces. It's the idea that there would be a kind of coherent organisation that would be able to respond to a tangible threat is almost laughable. And I mean, in fact, not like NATO, to be honest. I mean, you've got that many members who can't find themselves unanimous about what they are to do. I mean, there's like, the Russians haven't done anything actually to threaten a NATO country yet, so therefore we can't, we don't want to escalate this to a war. Meanwhile, Putin's kind of conducting. People in his government are now starting. Okay, when are you going to start calling it a war? Because actually, you're not going to be able to conscript people until it's officially a war rather than a special military operation.
Yeah, but Josh, I still don't hear anything in there that explains why young American men and women should sign up for the military service and potentially die because of what amounts to domestic European squabbles. Why don't European kids line up and die for this? Why isn't it your problem? Why is it our problem?
There are two avenues where I can actually talk about this. First of all, the main reason that the current security structure of the world looks the way it looks right now is after World War II, the United States was the only power with any huge economy, the military. And, it had to compete with the Soviets. And one of the main ways it decided to compete with the Soviets was economically and politically. And the way it did this was it talked to the rest of the world. You know what? We'll take care of shipping, defense, your security, and you can do whatever you want, economically speaking, just be on our side politically and economically. So the United States, basically, that's where NATO came from. That's where, you have the U.S. Navy going all around the world, allowing globalization to happen, basically, because all of a sudden you didn't need to secure shipping lanes because you could basically ship from anywhere you wanted because the United States basically made everywhere safe. And that was one way to combat the Soviets. And, Europe and other countries just became comfortable with this. They didn't have to pay for huge militaries. They didn't have to create imperiums.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you. I get that.
And this created this structure which came to the Europe that we have right now. But the truth is there's also another, and then that ended, in 89, 91 when the Soviet Union broke down, but the United States kept that going. But the thing is, the United States is number one to an extent that is just unfathomable, historically speaking, compared to other empires, economies, countries. And they're comfortable there. And the United States is one of those countries, just geographically speaking, whatever, it could detach from the rest of the world and pretty much be fine. But unfortunately, I think a lot of Americans don't realize this, the rest of the world wouldn't let them be fine. If the United States
help us.
no, not
I get tired of that.
No, it's not. No, the opposite. If what
stay away.
It will be the other way around. If any other major powers in the world want to become major powers, they know that the only way that they would feel secure if the United States is no longer a threat to them. Even if the United States didn't want to be a threat and wanted to be detached, that's not the way it works. If Russia is not in a position like that, China no, but there's still that possibility that something happens in the rest of the world, and any major power that wants to become a major power knows the only way it can be a major power is if it threatens the United States. And the only way the United States can be number one and secure is to make sure that nobody else in the world is a threat now, potentially in 20 years, in 50 years. And that basically, if you want to be comfortable living in the United States and make sure you don't have to worry about anything, and you can go to your Starbucks, you can go to your job, you've got your cheap fuel.
I hate Starbucks, but okay.
But just normal, regular life. That basically means the rest of the world has to be more or less in line with your kind of philosophies, and you can't detach you.
Okay, but I'm with you, Mike. I'm totally with you. And I don't want to go on about this too much. I'm probably too late for that. But but I just want to say this. If Europe, especially young European men, mostly men, if young European men cannot answer the call for the defense of their own nation, involves uniforms and arms and potentially laying down their lives, if they can't do it, then there's only so much we can do to help you. If Europe won't protect itself, I mean, Europe was barely procreating itself. It's barely replacing itself. But if Europe is so concerned about living the Dolce Vita and either ignores existential threats or tries to outsource their defense to America, whatever, that's the beginning of the end. You're on an irreversible slide to oblivion.
Europeans should be looking after themselves as well. But if they do or don't, it doesn't matter. The United States still has to prop them up if they want their own safety and security.
Yeah, and that's what we prop them up. A couple of weeks ago, I said something about how Europeans have become ungrateful, spoiled kids that they live with their parents when they're God knows how old, and they're completely dependent financially on their parents, and yet they resent them. And that's the kind of dysfunctional relationship we have now between too many European governments in America when it comes to defense arrangements and things like that. Europe, for whatever reason, refuses to stand on its own 2 feet. And as I said, let me just go through this list one last time. Bigger population than Russia. This is Europe. Bigger population than Russia. Bigger GDP than Russia. And 2 nuclear powers. Why do you have to pick up the phone to Washington at all? I have no idea. Why can't you handle Russia yourself? I just have to throw up my hands.
Mike made the point very, very clearly that I think the bigger picture is that it's in America's big picture, long-term interest to have functional alliances with a large number of countries spread around the globe.
Sure.
Because, if that means a kind of a substantial expenditure on defense, if it means the willingness to sacrifice a number of young American lives, then so be it. Because it's actually just an expansion of what, every nation since, medieval times.
What do we get out of this? I mean, just recently we sent $40 billion.
Continued existence.
America gets continued existence?
Yes.
How? How are we getting continued?
What I'm saying is, the only way
we send money and we get the finger in response. That's all we get. Resentment and
the rest of the world is ungrateful. I understand that, but the truth is
ingratitude, whatever. And again, the spoiled child thing, the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
And so what does America get out of this for getting involved in European affairs? And we get the pleasure of sending our army all over the world, the pleasure of spending billions, and
not be really threatened by anybody. But the only way to keep it that way is to make sure that no other nation or country gets to the point where it could. And this is something that wouldn't happen in 1 or 2 or 3 years, but over a generation. So it's one of those like a stitch in time situations. You have to keep bleeding out a little bit like this right now if you want to prevent in the long term a catastrophe for the United States. That's my belief.
I don't know if I buy into that or not. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
If any other country, China, I think is a little overrated, but let's just say China decides that it also wants to be a world power. The only way it can do that is to knock down the United States a couple of pegs, if not completely.
Oh, we're knocking ourselves down at a furious rate, so don't worry about that. We're taking we're taking ourselves out of the game as quickly as we possibly can, but that's another subject.
Like I said, the United States could function by itself, no problem, but unfortunately the rest of the world wouldn't let it.
Why can't Europe defend itself? Why is Europe so lazy and spoiled and just half awake?
Well, look,
but
I mean, it's been that's been the the status quo ante for a long time. But I mean, as we've seen just in the last few months of this year, at least some countries in Europe are waking up to the fact that, oh, you know what, we ought to take defence a bit more seriously because. So I don't know. I mean.
Just recently, the last week, was it 2 weeks ago or last week, we talked about how Poland and the U.S. have this deal to establish this new base here, right?
Yeah.
For X number of soldiers, Americans to come over. Hey, Poland, why can't you come up with 10,000 of your own soldiers and build your own base with your own people?
Well, but it's not really about the
simple questions I don't get answers to.
John, it's not about the raw numbers of personnel. It's about having 10,000 kind of highly trained, highly modernized, who can, it's like there are Ukrainian pilots allegedly training with the RAF in the UK at the moment, and especially on how to fly airplanes that aren't MiGs. I mean, it's like expertise is really, one of the should we say, distinguishing characteristics of different nations' militaries.
Okay, let's just leave it at that. We could go on all day about this, but we won't. Remember, I mentioned earlier, this is our last news episode until probably the beginning of September. We have one more episode to post later this week about Asperger's syndrome. Definitely check that out. It's a very interesting conversation. We're taking most of August off, so take it easy. Enjoy yourselves. And on behalf of Dr. Mike and Josh, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in September on the KrakCast.